Welcome to our Sound for Video session. Today's the 16th of March, 2017, and today's a Q&A session. Let's start with our questions. We have two questions here from J.H. Brooks. Can you further explain the concept of making a hole in the underlying music track for clearer dialogue? At what frequency range should this hole be? Thanks. Let me give you an example, but let me tell you first of all that this is a fairly kind of brute force, crude method of doing this. There are more subtle ways of doing it as well that are a lot more advanced, using things like sidechain compression. But let me just show you this method that we've talked about before. So here, for example, we have our film about the guitar maker that we've actually covered on here before lots of times. Let me play just a couple of seconds here, and then I'll come back and kind of talk through how I'll make the changes. This is a part where the music is sort of swelled up, and there is also some dialogue that it's competing with.
Got a box of toothpicks and started building things with the toothpicks.
Obviously overwhelming. So what I've done is I've put a parametric equalizer on the music bus here, or you could just put it on your music track, whatever you happen to have. This is just the parametric equalizer in Adobe Audition. And what I'll do is I'm going to start playing it back, and you can just watch and see what I do here. What my main strategy is I'm going to create a cut. I'm going to make it pretty wide. Very wide, in fact, is a pretty extreme example. And I'm going to sweep it back and forth until it sounds best to my ears. I can hear the dialogue, and yet the music is still present as well. So we're getting the dialogue, which is helping to tell the story, and we are getting the music, which is helping to convey the emotional feel. So here we go. First, I'm going to reset this. Okay.
Then we moved to California, and I didn't have any friends at first. So I went and bought dowels. I took the dowels and bent them and made these big kayaks out of these dowels, and then covered them with a skin like the Inuit type kayaks. I think that's the first thing that got me going with doing projects like that, working with my hands. I was watching a program on TV that showed a guy making cellos. And I didn't want to make a cello, but I thought, I wonder if I could build a guitar. So I got a book from the library.
Okay, so there's an example. So you can see I just kind of swept it back and forth. We ended up at 977 hertz. I did an extreme cut here. You might want to do a less extreme cut. And the way you can do that is you can see here on the audio tracks, I've actually already done some volume adjustment here, some fading. I've reduced it by 7 decibels. You could probably pull that down another 2 or 3 decibels and do it to taste. I'm not going to get into too much gory detail, but that's the general idea. And then you could probably back off of this EQ cut a little bit as well. So again, all you're trying to do is use your ears to hear what sounds best, sweep it back and forth, find the frequency. Once you do find the frequency, you can back this off some if you choose. But again, you're really relying on your ears to help you make these decisions as opposed to choosing a number. So I hope that makes some sense. So let's go back to the second question here. What is the difference between and the best to use reverb filter or a delay filter? Thank you. So those are actually two different tools. I don't really see them as one being better than the other. They're different, and they serve different purposes. So reverb, actually, let me start with delay. Delay is kind of the effect it's like the effect that you get if you were in a canyon and you shout, and then maybe a second later, you hear your voice echo off of the opposite canyon wall. That is kind of the effect that you also get with a delay effect or plugin. The difference with reverb is a little bit more like being in a cathedral, where someone is talking inside of a cathedral. There's that sort of almost shimmering sound you get. And what that is it's the sound of the person's voice reflecting off of the hard walls and floors and ceiling, and making what can be a very pleasant sound for either dialogue or singing or music or whatever it may be. So that, in very general terms, is a difference. So kind of if I had to boil it down, delay is a much slower response, and reverb is a much faster response, if that makes sense to you. So I hope that helps. I think there are different cases where you'd want to use them. Delay is used a lot in music or in radio advertisements. I just think of the funny radio advertisements from back in the maybe the 80s and 90s, like monster truck rallies, and they the voiceover artist would say something. It would be that kind of effect. That would be more of a delay. A reverb is often put on music tracks and things of that nature to kind of smooth it out a little bit. I guess that's the best way to describe it. So those are the differences, and hopefully that helps you make some decisions about when you want to use each one. Thanks for the questions there. Next one is from Scott Walter. Curtis, I'm trying to nail down my process for editing my dialogue so I can save time producing my regular content. I make videos for release on the web. I understand that there isn't a one-shoe-fits-all solution to audio editing, but when you record in the same format, same devices, same room, there's probably some crossover. I was wondering if you could critique my current process. And this is what he does. Number one, he uses a parametric equalizer, custom setting to clean up the dialogue, having a reference to previous video of mine, compression, loudness normalized to -18 LUFS, noise removal. He's using a DR40 and an NTG2, so there's a bit of a noise floor. And then he hard limits to -1 dB. So his question is there anything else you should consider doing? I actually think it sounds fine. Here is the address for an example of his finished video. Some thoughts that I had, I might actually move noise removal before the normalization. And the reason I do that is that if you have any sort of waveform asymmetry, noise reduction will usually make the asymmetry worse. Or maybe it'll make it better, just depends, but it can make it worse. So I generally try to do that before the compression. But if it's working for you, it's working for you. That's just a thought. Another thing is I might also move the compression before the EQ. The reason I do that is that sometimes when you compress, if there's a track where you have a lot of dynamics, a lot of really big peaks, and you're compressing so that you can normalize to the loudness target you want to hit, sometimes you have to compress a little bit more aggressively. And when you do that, the quality of the sound can change a little bit. And you might want to actually do some EQ after that to kind of get it sounding the way you want, as opposed to just going with whatever the compression does to your sound. That's just a thought. Again, if you're happy with the sound, I would stick with exactly what you're doing and don't change a thing. If you want to experiment a little, I would try to do the noise removal before the normalization and do the compression before the EQ. But overall, I think it sounds really, really good. So good work, Scott, and I hope you're the very best on your videos. All right, next question comes from Byron Childs. What are the best budget-friendly approaches or tools to use to get the best audio when working alone or with a small crew? Byron, that's a super broad question, and it's very difficult to answer because it's so broad. I don't know what you're recording exactly, other than you're working alone or with a small crew. But what I would say is the number one goal, generally, from my point of view, is to get the microphone close to the sound source, close to the person speaking, the talent, or whatever else you're recording. So that would be my number one goal. I know a lot of people, when they're operating solo or with a small crew, the first thing they do is they put a microphone on top of their camera. And sometimes you have to do that. I totally get that. But you're not going to generally get awesome audio that way unless you're just trying to record some ambiance. So if you are recording dialogue, almost always I like to get that microphone closer. So one thing that I would recommend that's on a kind of a budget-friendly approach to doing this, the Rode VideoMic Pro is actually pretty good if you get it close to the talent speaking. And so the way I do that is I use the Rode VideoMic Pro with the Rode VC1, which is an extension cable, and then I boom the mic on a $25 microphone stand, and there's some adapters. And in fact, let me just show you. I'll put a link for this video down below, but I boom the mic out over the talent, run the extension cable to the camera. All set, it's the price of the microphone plus like a $20, it's not even $20, I think it's a $10 extension cable, a $25 mic stand, and I think there's a $2 adapter depending on which mic you're using. All that's detailed in the video, so that may be something worth considering. Some other things I would suggest, though, choose your location for where you're going to shoot if you have that freedom. If you're operating on your own and you're directing as well, you get to choose the location. And if you get to choose the location, put some thought into going and checking out the location ahead of time and seeing how it sounds. Get in there, talk loudly, clap your hands to hear how much sound is reflecting, because that's not generally going to sound really great unless you're specifically trying to get that reflective ambiance in the recording, because it helps tell the story in that particular case. Usually it's not. If it's an interview, I generally would prefer not to have a lot of that. So make a good decision. Choose a different room if it doesn't sound good. So that's one thought. Also, use blankets to mellow out reflective rooms. So if you do have a room that you really love the visual look of, but it doesn't sound that awesome, get some blankets on the floor, hang them up if you can behind the camera. I came across this today. I actually have a subscription to a magazine called Tape Op. It's actually mainly for recording music, but it's got lots of great stuff in here. And there's an old picture of Roy Orbison. Many of you have probably heard of him. The younger crowd may not have heard of him, but the song Pretty Woman was one that he did. And you can notice in this photograph, he's at the RCA studios, and he has a bunch of blankets hung behind him as he's doing his vocal take. So, there's a guy who has some hit records recording at the RCA studio, and he has a bunch of what looked like sleeping bags hanging behind him. So if it's good enough for hit records, it's good enough for us too. So definitely consider getting blankets. And those don't look like blankets that are specifically designed for acoustical treatment. Those just look like thick blankets. So you don't have to spend a lot of money, but you just need to be creative, and you can make some great sounding things. So Byron, thanks for that question. I hope those are helpful for you. Thanks, everyone, again. If you have any other questions, go ahead and leave those down below. Hope you're having a good time making some great recordings, and we will talk to you again next week. Take care.